Hello, boys and girls, and Star Trek fans. Board now back with you for this week's review of Star Trek Discovery. So, this is going to be Season 3, Episode 2, and it's called Far From Home. So, I'm going to go into spoilers pretty early on in this review, so just warning in case you haven't seen the episode yet. But yeah, I'll dive straight in basically. So, this, as I predicted, is the other half of the story from last week. From the other perspective, we got Michael's perspective last week, her and Book on the planet, and now we get the crew's perspective, that like her crew on the Discovery. And yeah, we see them hurtling through space, landing in a different time zone. It's all very dramatic because they're going through like this sort of field of like meteors, and basically their scanners are knocked down and knocked out of commission when they land, and it's all very sort of grueling. Again, you can really see the budget in this episode and the high quality, and boy does it pay off, because it really adds to the tension, but also the fun of it and the spectacle. So the opening scene is a great way to just throw you into what's happening and their experiences, and it leads to all these little sort of like subplots and different things that are happening with the crew. And they've got some tough decisions to make because their scanners are down and certain parts of the ship not functioning properly. Then they're obviously not sure where they are exactly, what time zone or what, galaxy or planet. So with a lack of technology, that they struggle to really identify that. So Saru is being very cautious about going out and exploring. And one of the things he says in the episode is that because that they figure out quickly that there is like life on this planet. Tilly figures that out through some of her research, which is kind of what leads to her, I think, having quite a big role in the episode, and Saru kind of trusting her. There is another reason, really, but I'll get to that. But anyway, they figure out there's life on this planet, but obviously it's unknown life, and because they've been thrown into this future, then Saru's errs on the side of caution. In fact, at one point he gets into like this argument with Commander Giorgio, who's of course still on the ship from the end of last season, and the extended like recap actually shows you what some of the stuff that happened, and the stuff with her like yeah, brutally killing like that enemy. So yeah, kind of hilariously, his blood and guts are still all over like the control room. And she kind of steals the episode, Georgia, in some ways, because she does have this line where she's kind of like, yeah, hey, someone's like guts are everywhere. It's all gooey. Clean it up, basically, which is typical Giorgio, very kind of like straight ahead and direct, and just very harsh as well. And then we get a shot later of like his like innards kind of being like cleaned up, and blood and guts, and it's a whole thing. It's very visually sort of satisfying. But yeah, her and Saru have like a standoff. She's not willing to really accept orders from him. She's not willing to. She wants to do her own thing, and it's an interesting episode for her because on the one hand, I think there's some sympathy here, and it is coming from a good place where she's concerned about Michael, and she's determined to find Michael, but at the same time she's going about it in a typical kind of renegade, almost off the chart sort of way, where she's very sort of tunnel vision and direct, and not always thinking about things, and certainly not thinking of like the crew members and stuff. It's kind of all about her mission, but it leads to some great stuff, and we get this really good scene with her and Saru where they sort of stand off, and it's where he tries to put his foot down and says to her, look, there may be life on this planet, we know that, but we don't know anything about that life. We don't know if they're going to welcome us or not, how they'll feel about visitors like us, because I think he almost picks up on, or almost predicts really, then with them now being so many years in the future, there's no guarantee that members of Starfleet will be like welcome anymore on a planet like this. So, and good instance as it works out, but I think that's a really like exciting, meaty sort of like standoff between Giroux and Giorgio. And there's a couple actually in this episode, I think, but as I was saying before, I think Giorgio's like the MVP of this episode. Obviously, Michelle Yeoh is a fantastic actress, and she's so well cast in that role. And it makes me look forward to like the spin-off as well, involving her and her side of things more. But whenever she shows up in Discovery, she kind of steals the show in many ways, and this episode is no exception. So there's various things going on with her, and I think this episode is obviously a bit different than the first one. The first one was this unusual sort of thing where it was all very condensed, and you kind of just followed like Michael's story on this new planet, and in the future with obviously the new character of Book mostly, and the plot pretty much followed them all the way through. With this one, it's a bit more like spread out between the crew. Obviously, the sort of main focus is with Tilly, Saru, and I guess to a lesser extent Captain Jorginho and what happens to them. But you get certain other things with the crew on the ship and doing different things as well. But what happens is when Saru finally decides, let's go on to this planet, let's get off this ship and let's try and find out exactly what we're dealing with and just what we can find out. He decides to take Tilly with him, which kind of pisses Giorgio off no end. She's making all these sarcastic comments, and she's just mocking Tilly when Tilly's trying to give kind of her analysis and her opinion, and she's sort of stumbling over her words a bit. It's that typical sort of Tilly where she's quite nervous and kind of, it's just part of her nerdy sort of charm in a way, but obviously they do have limited information, and I think this is again another good episode for Tilly. She's definitely a contender for my kind of my favourite character of the show. She's certainly up there, and I think this is another good example, this episode, because we see her go from one thing early in the episode to something else later on, and there's some good stuff with her. The actress just feels so at home with the character, and she's really just very likeable. And although she kind of has that set kind of quirky, nerdy sort of thing, I think they do a lot of different things with the character as well. There is more like dramatic moments, some darker moments, and some good character growth as well, which we see in this episode again. But I think the whole point is that Saru takes her, partly because he does have confidence in her ability, but also it's a morale boost to her. And because even Tilly questions, well, why did you take me? There's like lots of people who could do this on the ship, sort of thing. But I think it does show what a good like Captain Saru is when it comes to this sort of thing. I think it shows that he's kind of good in installing confidence and boosting people, almost like a coach sort of thing in a sport, like a good sort of like motivator kind of thing. He'll find these little ways of like getting his troops up. So I think we see this with what he does for Tilly in this episode. So that tells a nice little story for the Tilly character over the course of the episode, where she's, anxious, a bit off her game at the start. She then is given a little bit of a boost. She's thrown into this situation, but then naturally there's a conflict at the heart of the episode, but she ultimately comes out the other end like even stronger, which is great. So yeah, Saru and Tilly go off on the planet. They go looking for life forms. They spot one, like in the distance, and a lot of Star Trek fans will pick up on the phrase that Saru uses when he sees the figure in the distance. He says first contact, right? Which, is that a name of a film? I'm pretty sure it is a Star Trek film. I'm almost I might be remembering the title wrong, but I think one of the Patrick Stewart Trek films is called First Contact. So could that be a cheeky little nod to the fans, a reference? Or could it just be coincidence? You tell me, folks. Let me know in the comments below. So what happens is Tilly and Saru obviously follow at a distance these characters. They follow them into this house, but they end up being ambushed and surrounded with, guns pointed at them. And again, they're like these sort of kind of a particular life form, a particular like culture. And what happens is Saru and Tilly sort of quickly find out what the situation is on the planet, and there's a couple of like, I think they're meant either like brothers or partners. One of them's called Cal, who Tilly kind of hits it off with quite well. But basically what happens is that they find out, then they tell them the situation, and that basically, Starfleet has been disbanded and all this, and there's sort of not the same sort of power for Starfleet or the Federation. But they also explain about the whole delivering thing and the fact that, on the ship they've got just that, so they've got what they need. So they almost like make a deal to like give them some delivery, and in return they'll help them out, and obviously not kill them or anything. And you get this sort of dynamic where Cal's like the sort of more gentler one. He's like more open-minded to them, and we get a similar situation to last week actually, which what happened to Michael, and that kind of, the long-standing but isolated like Federation, like the communications guy who was obviously moved and touched to see Michael for the so we get a similar thing here where Cal basically says, you have no idea how long it's. I've been waiting to see someone like you. I think he said it to Tilly. But on the other hand, his partner is a lot more distrusting, a lot more kind of edgy, and not so willing to like trust Saru and Tilly, and basically questions them and stuff. And even though he can see that they're wearing like uniforms and stuff, he's still not willing to just accept that they are who they say they are. Then what happens is that the people who are running the planet, basically the government, one of their agents, sort of officials, like shows up with a crew, with a gang sort of thing, and they sort of burst in just at the point where they're about to like go to the ship and give them the delivery, and to like boost their energy and their sort of supplies to help them out. At this point, they come in and they burst in and hold them all at gunpoint. And actually, the guy here who's leading this group, I recognise him. I can't think what he's been in, but I've seen him in something else. He's one of these character actors you see in a lot, but again, I think you have to applaud like the casting in this show of like the supporting parts like this, sort of expecting him to be a one shot anyway, but he does have a presence. He's very sort of intimidating in this scene. But yeah, that they obviously get wind of, then there's delivery. They have delirium, and in fact, he sort of like forces Tilly to show him what she's got, and they basically figure out that they're from the future because of that. Because yeah, they've got all this delivery, so they're almost going to force them to go and get it for them. And obviously the idea is that this potentially it'll fall into the wrong hands and that they'll probably kill them anyway. And to make a point, he actually kills Cal to like set an example and put them on warning. And I think what's interesting about this is that I didn't really see it coming, because I actually thought they were maybe setting Cal up as someone who certainly would survive the episode. Whether he would be in more episodes, I wasn't sure, but certainly I could see him surviving the episode and potentially could have something, going longer term. But anyway, I didn't expect him to get killed off, is the point. So that moment did sort of mean something, even though Cal had only been around briefly. But that's to sort of put them on warning, and yeah, it sort of forces Tilly's hand to sort of go off to the ship. Is it Tilly? Or yeah, I think it's Tilly that they asked to go and get the delivery from the ship. But yeah, Saru is the one who has to stay behind hostage as kind of like leverage. But what happens is there's a nice little like twist reveal, because basically good old Giorgio has gone off on her own. She's gone rogue because she's back at the ship, or she was back at the ship, obviously, and there's all this stuff going on with various members of the crew like doing different things. And at one point, one of them has this kind of like argument with Giorgio, and she leaves them. She goes to like the mechanic at one point, and she says, Giorgio said she's going to help. She's helping back there or something. And the mechanic says, really, Giorgio? Does that sound right? She's going to help? And there's almost like this da-da-da moment. And it pays off really well, because lo and behold, Giorgio hasn't stayed behind to help. She's gone into business for herself once again, and she shows up at this place, and boy does she kick butt. She's there, she's got her guns, there's lots of cool like fighting, some sort of head cracking sort of action, and yeah, that's the only way to say it really. She kicks absolute butt and kills most of them, and it just comes down to this thing of basically in the end Saru has to try and talk her down and has to stay firm, because although she's obviously saved them, he's again worried that, hey, she's going over the top, and that she could even kill like the innocent one sort of thing, that she's just going all rogue again. So there's again this sort of standoff, I should say. And the line of the episode, of course, it comes from Giorgio. It's absolutely fantastic, which I'll never forget. It is, what you call pain, I call foreplay, which is awesome. I'll say it again. What you call pain, I call foreplay. That is so Commander Giorgio. And it sort of reminds me a bit of the fact that Michelle Yeoh was, of course, like a Bond girl, or she was in a Bond film. Sort of the main, Bond girl, if you like, although you don't think of her character as a typical Bond girl. But she, of course, was in one. And I think that sort of line just makes me think of something that, like, her character in Bond might say, because the whole point of that is that she was almost Bond's equal. She was really tough and very independent, and she kind of did stand up to Bond in it, and there was this physical back and forth. So that line almost feels like something that could be from that Bond film, but it's a great moment. She kicks ass in this episode. And yeah, in the end, obviously, she finally stands down. But it's a great showcase for this episode. But Tilly as well gets some great stuff, and is ultimately stronger at the end. And I think in many ways this episode maybe feels a bit more like a Star Trek episode than the first one does. I sort of like the moment where Saru gives the other guy some choice. Because the leader of, like, essentially the villains, he's still alive, and Saru says, "I'm gonna hand over his vessel to you, but what happens to him is your choice." So again, very interesting, like, ideas from Saru, the way he like leaves choice in their hands, and exactly, it's almost like, well, this guy has like tormented you for like years. He's obviously been a thorn in your side. He's done a lot of like shady things, but it's up to you. Do you want to show mercy on him? And the great thing is, of course, I guess not surprisingly, he does. He does spare him, but at the same time, he basically tells him to go away. You're on your own now on the planet, and basically they've taken everything away from him, so he has no supplies to survive. So the whole thing is that he has to go it alone now, and he's taking a chance. But the important thing is he's got no powers. But at one point he says, I forget the character's name, but he says that I won't last the night, basically, with no supplies. And they're almost like, and your point is that's the chance you've got to take. If you survive, then fair play to you in a way, but if not, then that's just your bed, and you sort of made it in some ways. Either way, it's sort of the power has been reversed and justice has been done. And there's even like a sort of a clever little line from Georgia where she kind of says, "If you do make it through the night, I'm like coming after you basically with my weapons or something," which is obviously very tongue in cheek, but even so, it's like such a Georgia sort of line again, and a way to like strike fear in him, which is kind of great. But they obviously end up going back to the ship, and they're really set. They start building like the energy up, and they start fixing things, and they decide it's ready to set off. And there's a couple of other things happening in the episode with like crew members. In particular, you get Paul, who you've got to feel sorry for him. He's like woken from his coma basically, or he's still in a very bad way, and they have to like raise him and to help out, and because they need like the bay for other people. And so there's this whole sort of subplot where you've got Paul and the mechanic basically, who was another like little gem of a character, I think, from last season. Like, I think the back end it was mostly she was in, but she's also very kind of entertaining and likable in her own sort of way. But there's some good chemistry between them, because they basically have to go to a certain part of the ship and then like fix a certain area to kind of help the ship function. And there's a lot of banter back and forth, and there's a lot of like comedy just coming out of the fact that he's still in a bad way and still like in and out almost of consciousness. And there's certain things, at one point she's like egging him on, but almost like teasing him. It's like, come on, cranky pants sort of thing, because he has to go up and he has to like crawl through this sort of tight space to get to this thing where to repair it. And there's a lot of like sparks flying and stuff, and he's obviously still very shaky. And it's kind of played more light-hearted, but even so, it's obviously meant to be fairly kind of tense, something where it could go wrong, because then later on, his obviously his partner, the doctor, comes along. It's like, well, what's he doing up there? He's in no shape to do that. But yeah, there's some good like bonding there and chemistry. But obviously, when they return to the ship, they're starting to like get things working again. Not at 100% at first, but getting towards that way. And Saru makes the decision it's time to take off, basically. But back when they were, in that place, and they were confronted by obviously the villain character, he made this point, and it was almost a threat. It was a way to like manipulate them into like giving him, the parts and what have you. He said that on this planet, the surface is basically like parasite sort of thing, where over time it insects what's on it, basically insects the surroundings, and it comes up from the surface, and it just infects people, gets inside them. So he's basically saying that over time it would stop the ship from setting off, and it would get inside it and obviously potentially infect people. So we sort of see that happening, and once again, visually, this is all conveyed very well, really convincingly. It looks really good, this stuff. And the ship tries to take off and stuff, and it's this like back and forth. And in the end, it gets to the point where Saru's like, well, let's see what this is. Let's open the channel. and they open the channel, and lo and behold, Michael with a new haircut pops up on the screen. And so she's like, hey, I've been looking for you guys for like the past year, like. And yeah, that's sort of the end. It's this triumphant moment. They're like celebrating, and that's when it cuts to credits. So obviously that's one answer, how long Michael would wait. So we find out here that it's a year, but you sort of suspect something else is coming, which may like block them from like reuniting for a while. But that was obviously quite a logical way to end the episode, to like bring those two halves together at least, where they at least see each other. But there you have it. That's episode 2 of the 3rd season of Star Trek Discovery. Really good stuff again. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, held up pretty well, I think, compared to last week's. Obviously, different sort of episode. Had this real energy to it. I think a bit more funny at times than last week, which I appreciated, but a lot of excitement and like character drama. So this season so far has barely missed a beat and is clicking along nicely, setting some good stuff up. So I'm really excited for season 3 moving forward. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode. How do you think it compares to the first episode? And where do you see this season moving now? Any highlights for characters or standout lines? But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Discovery Season 3 overall so far. And I will be back about this time next week with my thoughts on Episode 3. Thanks for listening. You can like and subscribe. Look out for more new television reviews as well as classic TV reviews, shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The X-Files, Gilmore Girls, and many more. So thanks for listening. As I said, like and subscribe, ding the bell on on YouTube, I should say, gets you notification of when a new video pops up. But look out for more Discovery reviews coming soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.